I think we're going to go ahead and get started then. Thank you all so much for joining. Keep feeling free to put your information in the chat box. Like I said, we want to know who's on here today. And also feel free to pop any questions that you might have throughout this presentation in the chat box. We are more than happy to answer what we know now, but also level setting with folks and being able to say, we're going to get back to you in the future with an answer for the question if we can't do that today. We're really excited to have everybody on here for talking about why broadband data and why it matters at the end of this. So Alex, you can flip the next slide. So we have some great folks who are going to be here to talk today. My name is Anderson Clayton. I use she, her pronouns, and I am someone who is the broadband analyst for the Center on Rural Innovation. We've also got on here Jane Woodson, who you're going to be hearing from today, also a broadband analyst with the Center on Rural Innovation. Alex Kelly, my good old boss, who is the head of broadband consulting for the Center on Rural Innovation, and Curtis Hansen, who is the program manager for the Appalachian Regional Commission. Thank you all so much for being on and giving your talents and your wisdom today to folks on this call. We're really excited to be going through this with you. So I'm going to just let Natalie Roper, who's on here today from Just Transition Fund, pop up and tell us a little bit about her organization. So Natalie, you've got the spotlight.
Thank you. I'll be brief, and thanks for giving me a chance to spread the word about this, Curtis and all. Really appreciate it. So I threw this in the chat, but I'm Natalie Roper. I'm the Director of Special Projects at Just Transition Fund. I've been here for about a year, and my focus there is helping people like y'all apply to broadband federal funds. Before that, I founded and ran Generation West Virginia, which does a lot of work in broadband as well. So even though now I'm based in North Carolina, my roots are in West Virginia, which I feel like I need to always clarify. So we at Just Transition Fund can provide direct grants of up to $100,000 and technical assistance for folks to go after federal funds. So I reached out to Curtis because felt like anyone on these calls, you will either very soon be in that place or eventually be in that place, or maybe already in that place where you want to be applying for federal funds. And we're truly here to help. We offer flexible grants on purpose. Most people use that for hiring a grant writer or staff capacity, just funding your own time to pull these applications together. We know that federal funds are critical and important for scaling your amazing work and can be really challenging to actually apply for. So that's what we're here to do and offer flexible support. Technical assistance just means I'm here to help kind of connect you with folks like Alex and Anderson if you have questions which you don't need my help with, but other experts as well as needed, and just be alongside you in the process. But we also have grant reviewers who have expertise in certain agencies and can look at your application before you submit and give you third-party feedback and just be another set of eyes. So we want to see more Appalachian organizations like y'all's apply and get broadband money, and we're here to help. So reach out, and excited to chat with you anytime. Thanks for giving me a few minutes.
Yeah, thanks, Natalie, for being on. Anytime we get to tell people about some technical assistance money they can apply for, we are more than willing to do it. So once again, that's $100,000 grants to help apply for federal grants right now, which is something that we know resources are strapped in communities that look like the ones that we're in right now. And finding that help is a really hard thing to do when you've got so much money coming down from the federal level. So thanks, Natalie, for coming on.
A one-page application, and we look at them within a matter of 2 weeks. So we are quick, and like, again, if you're applying for power, we would have time to tell you yes or no, even within that timeline. We know the timelines are quick, and we try to be responsive. So yeah, and there's both emails are fine. That's my Generation one. I check that too. And I put my Just Transition one in the chat as well. I'll throw my cell in the chat too if you're a texter.
See, as you can tell, Natalie Roper is bootstraps on the ground, and that's something that we're trying to do with these webinars too, is just make broadband a little bit easier to access for folks, especially the information that's going on about it, and because we know it's coming at people fast. So Alex, if you don't mind setting the stage. We all know right now that mapping is going on across the country for determining where and where not broadband serviceable locations are. And so counties all over the ARC region have just been inaccurately represented in these maps, right? We know that from the hollers to everywhere in between, honestly, in Appalachia, that folks are not being counted correctly. And also that this is a hard process to do, especially when you have different geographical turf that you're dealing with. especially for small providers and honestly municipalities and localities who are trying to deal with this. So the questions that we really want to answer today are, why does mapping and data accuracy matter? And how can data underpin the network design, business planning, and grant applications that you're going to have to put forth in the future for building out your networks? The agenda, once again, why data accuracy matters. The new FCC maps, we all have heard 477 forms for years of our lives now. For some of you, you're just now learning about them, and that's okay too. We're going to go over both of those things today. Also, improving the new maps. And you can't close the gaps if you don't know what they are. That is the biggest piece about data here that we really want to emphasize with everyone is that, communities have got to take this on themselves too, as being a part of the process of figuring out where we have service and where we don't, and who can access it right now and who can't. And those are really hard problems to be able to answer on the ground without having the guidance and the ability to say, well, how do we do that effectively? And so we're really going to try to help answer those questions today, but also know this is an ongoing process. The target for broadband keeps changing, and it will always be that way throughout the next phase of our history within this. And the next phase of broadband really is one-on-one. So we're really excited to hopefully answer these questions. But like I said, if you've got any more, pop them in the chat box, and we're always available afterwards too. I'm going to pass it over to Jane now, who's going to give you a little bit more in-depth detail about some of this. So Jane, tossing it over.
Great. Thank you so much, Anderson. So let's dive into why accurate data matters. And we'll start off with what kinds of data we need in order to successfully deploy broadband in our communities. We need granular data in order to address these gaps. And here are some examples of the types of data that could be used. We need data on physical locations, specifically addresses of places that need service, the served and unserved status of those addresses, the need for service. Some structures are marked as unserved, but they don't actually need service. So, for example, a cemetery might be marked on the FCC map as unserved, but it doesn't need broadband. And finally, service providers available and the speeds that they actually offer to their customers. We also need data on existing broadband network infrastructure, such as the locations of poles, towers, hubs, buried and aerial fiber, the ownership of all of these structures, and also standard and non-standard fiber drop distances. So basically, which addresses have may have a higher fiber installation cost due to the distance between the home and the nearest road, for example. Finally, we need to have a clear idea of what the community needs and what it wants. This can include gathering data on barriers to access. So are people having trouble affording the broadband services that are available in your area? Are they struggling to get the devices they need in order to access that service? Is digital literacy affecting broadband usage? It's really good to get down to the meat of the problem. And are residents interested in a new internet provider? What are they looking for in their new internet provider, and what do they value? This data can be gathered in a number of ways. Surveys, which involves gathering info directly from your community. This can be done virtually or physically, and we would recommend both approaches in order to reach everyone in the community. Municipal data, so data that municipalities have already gathered, such as parcel data or road mile shape files, that can be extremely helpful. State data, many state broadband offices have their own broadband availability maps, and they have more data than, or more specific data than the FCC maps, which should also be considered. As mentioned before, this type of data is very useful for a number of reasons. It can be used for several different phases of broadband planning. Market analysis, gathering data on existing ISP footprints and the rates that they charge can help you make assumptions about the customer penetration rates that you would need in order for a competitive broadband deployment. Data can also, of course, be used for network design. Physical addresses and the existing infrastructure in the area can be used to determine capital expenditures for your project. Data is vital for determining funding eligibility. Many grants, especially the ones we've been talking about in the series, depend on the number of unserved or underserved addresses in the area, and that number will directly impact the amount of money allocated to your community. Data is also necessary for the financial modeling stage of broadband planning. For example, the number of customers who have pledged their subscription to a new broadband service, your new broadband service, can help project a network's costs and future revenue. The locations of these customers will determine the average drop in installation costs. Just another example of what kinds of data can be used and how they can be useful. And finally, data can also be a great means of boosting community support. For example, a resident speed test campaign can increase local awareness about the digital divide and also increase awareness about your ongoing broadband project. The pre-subscription campaign can also be used as leverage for funding. So for example, if a municipality is pursuing a public-private partnership, maybe with an ISP, it can give the private entity the number of households who have said, yes, I would like to sign up for this new internet service when it's available. And that can be a great asset. So a lot of the data we've talked about comes from broadband mapping processes. So it's really important that we also talk about the FCC's new maps, which Anderson mentioned earlier. These will play a key role in federal funding decisions. So a little bit of history on the maps. The old map was notoriously inaccurate for many reasons. The data was primarily self-reported by ISPs, and they also only needed to report their advertised speeds, not actual speeds that customers on the ground were experiencing. The organization of the map also presented a hurdle. If a provider could serve one location in a census block, that entire block was marked as served on the map. So that presents a lot of gaps in clarity and accuracy. But there have been some changes. Congress passed the Broadband Data Act in 2020, and that revamped the broadband data collection and verification process. So we do have a new map now with a different approach. The new map, or the new fabric, offers more specific data. Rather than served or unserved census blocks, we have broadband serviceable locations, which are much more specific. These are at the address level. A broadband specific or serviceable location is any residential or business location that could receive mass market broadband service. So we have a much clearer picture of what individual homes and businesses have service and what type of service they have. So some very important things to note about this new fabric. The new fabric has a broadband availability layer that illustrates what types of broadband technology and speeds are available at every broadband serviceable location. So if you pull up the map and search your own address, you should see a list of specific ISPs that claim to serve your specific address, and also their intended speeds and the type of technology they use. Individuals can challenge service at their own locations. The process requires documentation that the stated service is actually not available. So if, keeping with that example, if you look up your home and you see some ISPs listed there saying that they have service for your location, but they don't actually, or they can't provide service to you within 10 days, then you can submit a challenge, but you need to have documentation showing that, yes, I reached out to this ISP and requested service and they said no, or never got back to me, something like that. Public jurisdictions can also make challenges. They can challenge broadband availability for whole areas in bulk with their own data on an ongoing basis. And over here on the right, here's an example of one of the ways that we can filter locations in the map. These green dots are homes that have wired service, so probably fiber, serving 100 or 100 download, 20 upload speeds or greater. The red dots with the white in the middle, these homes do not meet that standard. So it's just an example of how the map might look, and you can change the parameters for your searches and so on. Anyway, another very important thing to note is that speed tests are not considered valid for challenging wired service. So the map may continue to rely on advertised rather than actual speeds.
So sorry I'm messing with the screen share. For whatever reason, the images weren't showing up. Give me 1 second, I'll get it back the way it's supposed to be. But sorry, Jane.
No, it's fine. Just curious, has anyone explored the maps in your own areas? I'm sure everyone has.
I love to explore the maps. I do think they're really interesting. If you haven't checked them out, Google it.
Yeah, especially I would recommend looking up your own address or addresses of people you know in rural areas just to see what's going on.
Oh, there we go. All right, back at it.
Thank you. The FCC maps are extremely important because they will determine how much BEAD funding the NTIA will award to each state and tribal area. Challenges made now will not impact how much each state is allocated, but it may impact how much funding states allocate to jurisdictions within the state. So states are creating their own challenge processes that are separate from the one that the FCC has put out so that areas can report inaccuracies in the map, and that may affect how much funding they receive directly from the state or how much entities in that area receive from the state. Location data from the FCC's map is owned by a private firm, just so you know, so it's not legally allowed to be used for broadband planning, which is another reason why gathering your own information from other sources, like we mentioned earlier, is extremely important. There are processes for improving the new maps, so we'll talk about that, and I'll pass things over to Alex to talk us through that new process.
Great, thank you so much, Jane. So look, we're throwing tons and tons of stuff about data at you, and I want to just give one other piece of context before we get into some specifics about challenging the FCC maps. There's data at all different levels of government, local, state, national, all different levels of quality. It's in a different format in every jurisdiction, and it is, in my mind, one of the most daunting and just hard to conceptualize facets of broadband planning. Because as Jane was mentioning, as Anderson was mentioning, you can use it for almost every single step of the way when you're doing broadband planning. But the fact that it's so different in every location and the data you have or don't have is so different in every location means that it's hard to give this is exactly what you need and this is exactly how you should use it kind of presentation. When we do work with different rural communities, we are very used to working with whatever data we have available and filling in the gaps with our best guesses or even algorithms to kind of massage things around the corners, because almost no jurisdiction has a complete set of every single type of data that's useful to do broadband planning. That just unfortunately doesn't exist. So if this is a lot, and if you're thinking, I don't think that we have access to everything that we've mentioned, that is okay. But the point of this is broadband planning should use data as much as possible. And if you have certain types of data, there's many things you can do with it. And if not, try to gather it. And then if not, don't let that stop you. I think that would be my message there. So look, we talked a little bit about a bunch of the types of data that's useful. The last section here before we get to the Q&A and discussion is a little bit about the new maps that the FCC is building. As Jane mentioned, those maps are very important for allocating resources, right? The NTIA is allocating resources to states based on those maps. And there may be and are likely to be a number of states that use the federal maps in some way or another with their BEAD program and how they disperse money to communities and ISPs. How every state puts that together is up to their own predilections. And so we're not exactly sure how every state is going to do it, but many of them will probably rely on these maps in some form or another, which is why it's so important to take a look at them for your area and figure out if there's a way to maximize what you could be eligible for through the FCC's challenge process. So the FCC has these maps. They hired a private firm to do it. Unfortunately, the terms of data ownership, as Jane mentioned, are not ideal because the data that the FCC is portraying, although it may be, it would be totally useful to use for broadband planning if you could, technically you are not allowed to do that. What they are doing is they have a range of ways to challenge the data, because the first round of these maps, and in fact the second round as well, have had a lot of errors in them that people have identified, and some of the challenges of the old maps have persisted in terms of ISPs kind of over-reporting where they serve, which is obviously a challenge because if you because it could make an area not eligible for funding that actually should be, for example. So there are generally two types of challenges that you can do if you look at these FCC maps and notice something that isn't quite right. Any jurisdiction or any level of government can mount a challenge, whether you are a county, a state, anything in between, municipality. Any level of government is allowed to mount a challenge. There's two pieces to the maps that you can challenge. One, what you see on the left, you can challenge the fabric, which is, where are those broadband serviceable locations? So if you are a community that has had a bunch of new subdivisions go in, you might go on the map and say, well, these subdivisions haven't made it up to the federal data set yet. And that's just one example. Many people are going in and seeing that the location fabric as it is now is inaccurate, and then especially in tribal areas or areas that are particularly rural, right? The reason why it's important to try to make sure that every single building in your area is accurately reflected on these maps is because if it's not there, it risks not being able to be funded by a grant, right? And so if you can't if a location does not get funded because it does not show up on the map and it does not get built, then that is a hole that you need to fix your broadband service via another means. So to challenge the fabric, individuals can go on. If you see your own house is not on the map, or the dot is in the wrong place, or any number of other things, you can challenge that yourself. It's a little bit onerous of a process, and it's certainly not an efficient way to go about things to tell everyone in your community to go check your house, right? You could do that. That's certainly not the most efficient way to do it. You can also challenge the location fabric in a bulk manner by basically putting together a data set of where your understanding of broadband serviceable locations is, submitting that entire data set to the FCC. And that is, if you have data, parcel data, for example, if you have a municipal electric company that has data on everyone they serve, right, what their address is, that's a data set that could be really useful. Things like that, very useful to help fix the federal maps to make sure that everyone in your community is represented in the broadband map. On the right, we have the other type of challenge you can mount, which is service availability. Basically challenging what the FCC reports is available at your house in terms of broadband technology and the speeds that you can get. So again, here, there's an option to challenge it as an individual. If you go on and see that it says that some cable provider claims they serve your location and they don't, or it says AT&T serves your location with fiber, but they don't because you've tried to get it installed and they said no, you can challenge your individual location. But again, if you have the ability, as a municipality to do a bulk challenge, and that can be a much more efficient way to go about things if you have data, which you might not, that speaks to this. So entities submitting bulk challenges, they're doing so if, for example, if they have permits or right-of-way applications from the cable provider that show exactly where they've built and where they haven't, right? You can go in and say, well, this is what we know, where we know to be the infrastructure. And if that's different than what the FCC has, they should accept your version of things because in theory, it's more accurate, right? So that's, I think that's all I have for these slides. I think to kind of wrap up this section before discussion, the thing that we're encouraging communities to do now is to consider whether you have data that can be used to bulk challenge either the location fabric or the service availability, ideally both, right? There are errors in every single community. Unfortunately, it's just a very hard endeavor to map every location in the country and what broadband is there. So if you can participate because you have data that speaks to either one of these things, it's really useful to do at this point in time. The second advice that we have is if you are planning on doing broadband planning in a way that you anticipate needing more data and you are going to collect that data from individuals via a community-wide campaign, do it in a way that allows you to keep and access and use that data however you want moving forward. So, for example, it is better to, if you are going to ask people to check to see whether the FCC is correct about their location and whether they have the service that their maps claim, rather than directing people to record the results of checking on that with the FCC, where the data will go and then not be able to be used by you, it is much better to collect that data yourself so you have it, submit a bulk challenge using that data, but also then keep it for your own planning purposes, right? So those are, I think, two of our big recommendations. Have some discussion prompts here, but I just also want to open the floor in case people have questions because as we've been segmenting up the different stages and aspects of broadband planning, I think data is one of the more complicated pieces here. So with that, open the floor. And Curtis, please jump in as well if there's anything in particular that you noticed that we either missed or you think deserves reiteration or.
Yeah, I'll add something that folks might not be aware of is that, we're doing a lot of work and we talked a lot right now about service availability mapping, basically being able to see where broadband is and isn't. The federal agencies are also all being required now to report broadband funding on a household location by location basis, resulting in a map. And they're on like their third demo at this point, kind of interagency internal demoing of a map that shows home is served, home is unserved, or home is unserved but funded, and by what program is it funded, and what grant service area does it belong to, and how far along is that project in its build out. So that's going to result, at least in the federal world, and that'll interact with the states in their BEAD program implementation, of a lot better understanding of the funding that's available today to help solve the infrastructure problem. So that's something else to keep in mind, and that also is a reminder and a bit of a preview for you that ARC will start to require its grantees to report at the location level soon.
That's great. Okay, we've got a question from Kathleen in the chat, and then I'm going to call on you, Cheryl. So Kathleen asked where the FCC got their data. Great question. The FCC awarded I think it's a $50 million contract to a firm, CostQuest, to build the new FCC maps. CostQuest had built the location fabric using a conglomeration of different sources. Some sources they paid for, some sources that were publicly available, I think, for example, via the US Postal Service and others. So the location fabric is a kind of mishmash of their best guess at whatever, based on whatever data sources that went into that. And then the service availability data is data that is again reported by ISPs to the FCC. So they have rules on their website about how to report, what format to put it in. I could call on Ashley to give us an overview of this, because I know they Ashley at Pangea just went through this on the call. But if you are a fiber provider, for example, you can report any location as served if it's within 500 feet of your distribution network. If you are a DSL provider, you can report service of 25.3, I believe, if it's within 6,000 feet of a DSLAM. Like, they have rules that you're supposed to follow, and then you're supposed to get the submission signed off by an engineer or an experienced broadband entity. That hasn't necessarily prevented the submissions from many different ISPs from being fairly error-ridden. I think the general industry consensus is that some ISPs have been more accurate with this round of map of data submission. Some ISPs, it still is kind of overstated what they're claiming to serve in this new mapping paradigm. So, Cheryl, you had a question.
Hey, I liked your suggestion of gathering our own data and then using that to do our bulk challenges. My question is, how is that accomplished in day-to-day, like the world? Because I have a data set and I have like 1,000 addresses that have reported to me that they cannot get broadband at their house.
Yep.
I have that in a data set. I have it on an ArcGIS map. I have the FCC map, which I have to click on single addresses to figure out if it's saying that it's. So do I have to click on every freaking address that I have in my database on the FCC map to see who says that they're providing service there, and then put that on my list to challenge? Like, it is the most cumbersome process in my mind. I don't know how to do it.
Yeah. I'm going to try to answer that without having the full BDC rules in front of me and not being a lawyer. So I will rely on folks to jump in and interrupt me if they know something different. Given you are a representative of a municipal entity, you are allowed to have access to this proprietary data that that CostQuest has assembled that is not available in bulk to lay people. Once you request access to that, it comes in a shapefile, and that shapefile has has all the data built into it, like basically a big spreadsheet. What you can do with that is put that on a map, overlay what you have, and depending on your GIS chops or your team's GIS chops, there are various kind of geospatial things you can do to automatically do some of the work that you're talking about doing manually. You could also, simply putting them on a map side by side, could show patterns and kind of help you make inferences about the data you've collected versus what the FCC has just in general. But because you're a municipal entity, you should have access to the data in its raw form that's technically proprietary. You can submit the data you have as a bulk challenge, just submit it and just say, okay, if this is different than what you have, use this. Or you can kind of do some visual comparisons. Is that kind of helpful, Curtis?
That would be helpful. Yeah, I got to figure out how to do that. I mean, I'm thinking of one specific instance. It's actually property that we use, my family's property. You know, the house does not have access. We confirmed with the provider. There are 4 other houses on the same driveway that also do not have access, but they're all showing as right. Served. So trying to get, and that's just one little instance.
No, it's so frustrating. I mean, I'm allowed to say this. I don't know if Curtis might not be allowed to say this. The mapping process that our fine government has set up has not made it easy for communities. It really has not. The number of places where we're working where, you've got someone like a house that has challenged because they're not served and successfully gotten that challenge, and their house is now red instead of green. Then there's a greenhouse. Then there's another red house because they also did a challenge. And the fact that on either side, they both successfully challenged and proved that the maps were overstated, but the house in the middle still counts as served. Like, it doesn't make any sense, right? It is just really frustrating. And I think Kathleen asked another very good question. How important is it that we work on getting the FCC map corrected? Kathleen's town says the maps say it has full coverage, but it's incorrect. And the map shows all of New York State being covered. So I think there's a couple of things going on here, Kathleen. One, you should go into the user interface of the maps is not great. And when you first open the map, because when you first open the map, the settings are showing houses that are covered by basically anything, including satellite service. Well, guess what? Every house you can kind of say has satellite service because that's just the way satellites work. So if you turn off the satellite service marker in the settings, it hopefully will be a little bit more nuanced of a picture. What you can do in the settings is say you want to look at only wireline service of whatever speeds you want to look at, and you can pick settings that are reflective of what the parameters of the grant programs are actually going to be. So that should help with the part about the map showing all of New York State being covered. That being said, the first part of your question is a very good question regardless. How important is it that you work on getting the FCC map corrected? So this is a tough question because every state will ultimately run their BEAD program differently, and some states will give more latitude to adhering to the FCC data, and some states will likely not. I don't really know where New York will land, but I think the thing that I would say is most important is getting the location fabric correct, because we do know that states have to use the location fabric to make funding allocations. They don't necessarily have to use what the FCC map says about the service levels. They can come up with their own determination of what should be funded and what shouldn't be funded, but they cannot fund a building that's not on the FCC's map, put it that way. So that's, and I think that's the broadband locations, that's more often the type of data that a rural location actually has at the ready and is relatively easy to submit as a challenge. I say relatively easy. Beyond that, I would say before investing a lot of time into doing a big data collection effort for service level availability, I would just want to make sure that you were likely to need that data for other things and that your state wasn't going to provide another avenue for determining the service level that you could use to find funding. And that's a complicated answer, and I don't think I spit it out of my mouth very clearly, but hopefully that helps. And Curtis, it looks like you might want to chime in about the ARC programs, perhaps. And
yeah, and I'll also point out, Cheryl, you probably saw that Ryan raised his hand and said that they're doing a bulk challenge, and he threw a link in the chat for the website where you go about doing that. I know there's a bunch of webinars online. I saw Dustin from the Marconi Society did a webinar. I think that's on the Broadband Hub. You could check out. For Marla, your question about what maps should we use as we're applying for ARC funding. ARC is more flexible than some other agencies, and we, just in the recognition that in rural areas, especially areas that have been, generationally left behind and forgotten by the ISPs of the world, and the maps are probably less accurate there than in other areas. And we also have a mandate to make sure that our broadband is high quality in the Appalachian region. We're asking our power applicants specifically to work with their state broadband offices on kind of verifying if a project is eligible or not. So that means that if you start with, for example, the FCC data, and then also have data maybe from speed tests from your local communities that refute that, you can then take that to your state broadband office and explain to them your math on why you think an area is unserved or underserved, and use that math to get their blessing that then you could bring in as an application. So in some ways, I'm not giving you an easy button to push, other than saying we're trying to be as flexible as possible given the uniqueness of the Appalachian region.
We should have had a disclaimer about how annoying this webinar was going to be.
Yeah, by the way.
We should have hosted it at 5:30.
Yeah, pre-happy hour. I mean, that is the theme of broadband mapping forever, has been it's messy and no one's happy with it. But we're trying. I do think that this location level mapping at least lets us have the conversation and argument at a level that matters to individual homes.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Curtis, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah, how's it going, Kurt?
Yeah, good. Kurt Anderson, Ithaca, New York. I live in an adjacent county, but you referenced ARC was going to be looking at or revamping your own mapping system or evaluation as it pertains to mapping. And what was the comment on that you would look to see if individual households were served or eligible for service?
So once the FCC gets done building their new, and they're literally calling it like the Section 60105 map right now, with like a placeholder, to be determined better name than that. But once they get their mapping portal built, ARC is going to be required to report on our grants to the FCC on a location by location basis. And we can also submit shapefiles saying, here's the outline of the area that our grant served, and here's how much money we spent, and it was for this speed, and it's supposed to be built by this date, and here's who it went to. We will be reporting that level of data to our federal colleagues starting soon. And I think it's technically for every project that we awarded since IIJA passed. So we'll have to do a little bit of going back and helping our grantees get that data pulled together. So I think go ahead.
Curtis, are you, to get access to that data set or to that portal, you have to be a federal agency, right?
Yes, they keep that data at the federal level for now. I think states will have to get access to that for BEAD grant administration, I think. But yeah, that data set will be strictly for federal agencies to coordinate their funding efforts.
Curtis, hey, this is Marla, and I actually pulled over. I have been at Ohio Broadband's office today.
Oh, nice.
Digging into with the team there, with Peter and Drew, with the maps for our county in Appalachia. Nice. So we were just having this exact same conversation, and they were going, will that impact power right now? And we didn't know the answer.
Yeah, you mean, will the map challenge process that we're going through right now impact power? I think it will, to the degree that the state lets it, because before every state had a broadband office or broadband authority, a lot of the burden of verifying project's eligibility fell to the ARC staff in DC. But with all these great broadband offices out there and all of them having a 5-year action plan, and all the new broadband projects that are going to be cropping up, we decided to look to the states to lead the eligibility determination process.
Okay, fantastic.
Yeah, of course. And jumping back to Kurt, does that answer your question on kind of ARC's adjusted approach going forward?
Yeah, it does. just thinking, if you remember a year or so ago, you through Southern Tier 8 and were promoting or trying to amplify enrollment in the affordable connectivity program, right? Because the numbers were lagging way behind. And I guess I'm also put this Ithaca Area Economic Development hat down and put on my school board hat in rural Appalachia. Because of the poverty level in our district, the entire school district is eligible for the affordable connectivity program. Speaking personally, our household really financially should not be eligible, but because our children are enrolled in the district, we say, hey, it's $30 off a month, right? Yeah. I'll take that. And myself and another school board member promoted the heck out of that across the district, through the papers, on the online forums. And I think like 6 people registered from the district. It was abysmal. And our numbers through that effort did slightly increase in the county, though we lagged behind Tompkins County. And I'm wondering, because of the granularity of this mapping data, if, for instance, my rural county would say, hey, we want to apply for a grant, right, through ARC or some other entity, and you or whatever other agency it is looks at that map and they say, well, the entire school district is eligible for this project or this program. But I know for a fact that these households just aren't registering if they even have service. Like I hope that level of data, or that say, hey, everybody in this district, is good, doesn't obfuscate what really needs to be done in these mountainous areas.
Yeah, I think in terms of that aspect of like broadband data and broadband reporting, there's really fewer eyes on it than you'd hope. And when I say that, I'm saying that I don't think anyone will hold the fact that an entire school district is eligible but not participating against you in any way.
Good.
And I would encourage anyone who's eligible to apply. So that includes you, that includes everyone, right? That's because right now, if you look at the enrollment and participation in ACP, it's so low. To me, it makes me worried that when it comes time to renew funding for that program, that they'll look and say, no one really cared about it, so why refund it?
Tragic. You know it as much as we do. And it's, again, being a school board member, I look at those poverty levels. I'm like, come on, people, it's $30 off a month, and you just can't get them to do it, And so it's. I don't want to hog too much time, but I was thinking about that. Gosh, I hope we're not all considered, like in the initial stage of these maps, that we're all served because that program's eligible to all these households, but it's just not the case.
Yeah.
Kurt, a question on that though, like. I know that y'all pushed it really hard in every sense, but was that just the advocacy of it? Was there another person that was going around like helping folks sign up to it and everything, and like actually sitting down and filling out the application process with them? Because I'll be honest with you, the ACP is also complicated to apply for. And that's been the thing that we've seen is like needing, and I know, right, capacity, where does it come from? And
no. Myself and that other board member actually she went through it herself with her provider. I went through it with mine. And we made a step-by-step as simple as possible. And we actually beta tested that with a few people, like follow these directions. If anything is wrong, let us know. It is like the dummies guide to registering for this program, and published that all over the place and still couldn't get anybody to take it.
Will you send that to us then so we can also share that out to other people though too?
Yeah. So I won't hog any more time. I'll email that to you now.
It might work in others though. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. Hey, if it helps somebody, take it.
Yeah. And also there's another woman, Christina out of Washington State, that we're going to do a webinar like this at some point in time about like train the trainer for ACP affordability, or like how to get people on that program. And so I think there's also maybe ways to loop you into that too, Kurt, but just other ways to help people get and figure out how can we be actually giving out this information better. So
it was aside from me showing up at their house and doing it for them, I don't know what else I could have done. Would you just throw your email in the chat? I'll shoot it over to you.
Happily. Thanks, Kurt. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I got to jump in here. We tried that same thing, but we didn't do a dummy version. And people were afraid because they thought it was like the federal government, and they were afraid that it was they'd have to put it on their taxes. I mean, we had all kinds of weird things and we went to the school, and we, as in 5 of us, and we had failure rate, unfortunately. So I'd love to see the dummy version.
Yeah, it is a tricky process, and Kim, there is an online enrollment, or you can even go through some of the ISPs are able to help you even enroll. So there's a whole, like Anderson said, there will be a whole effort to kind of educate folks on ACP enrollments here soon. One other note, and I don't know if there are other questions on mapping, one other note I wanted to point out was a lot of the conversation about mapping is before the infrastructure arrives, and talking about reporting on broadband is about availability, yes or no. Something to keep in mind is that once the grant funding arrives and your infrastructure gets built out, I think it's on the folks who helped provide that money to keep up and provide some accountability for the quality of service that's being delivered. And there are a lot of ways that you can do that and use those similar data sets, because just because there's broadband there today doesn't mean that as demand continues to grow at a crazy rate, that the aggregate demand in that area won't bog down the network and ruin people's experiences. So that's another thing to keep in mind down the road, is that just because, it gets built once doesn't mean you can take your eye off the ball, I think.
Great. Well, I think this has been exceedingly helpful. It's great to hear the conversation. We'll just maybe wrap it up by mentioning again the upcoming sessions. Hopefully by the end of this, we'll have covered everything you need, at least at a foundational level. And so next week, we're taking a week off while the Corey staff is at a staff retreat. Coming back to this the week after, that's the week of March 23rd, we have, I can just pull it up on the screen, upcoming sessions. We have a session on partnership models on March 23rd. Very important, a lot to dig into there. After that, we have a session dedicated to funding and financing, public, private, state, local, etc. And then we'll close it out with a session on digital inclusion and planning and advocacy, just because that work will happen as soon as we build the infrastructure and ongoing. So we thought we'd end with that. So as always, if you have any questions in between sessions, you are more than welcome to reach out to us. We'd be happy to schedule a one-on-one time to talk more about what we've been discussing at these sessions. As a quick reminder, broadbandhub.org is a platform to provide free access to broadband leaders and experts. So do check that out if you have time and have more questions. And there's a way to kind of have community conversations there, which is available on this slide, which we'll send out. So I think I will call it there. And lastly, don't forget to check out the Just Transition Fund stuff that Natalie said at the beginning of this. That is a really great opportunity to get the low lift application for some serious funds. So thank you all. Take care, everyone.